Good morning. In calling on people to love their enemies, I wanted to learn more about the different kinds of love. So I did what anyone would do. I looked it up on Wikipedia. There are 4 Greek words for love. Phileo means friendship or affectionate love. Eros is passionate love with sensual desire and longing. Storge means affection in ancient and modern Greek, and it's a natural affection like that felt between parents and their children. And then there's agape, which means unconditional love. Martin Luther King described it as an overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. Agape is the love of God operating in the human heart. It is agape that we speak of today. As Rachel said last week, when we said we would stand on the side of love, we were not just making a demand to ourselves, to the world, but ourselves as well. We could have said stand on the side of the oppressed, on the side of the disenfranchised, could have even said stand against the haters. But no, we were demanding something greater, something challenging of ourselves and all who would stand with us when we chose the word love. I mean, can you imagine marching from Selma to the capital of Alabama with Dr. King? Can you imagine it as a person of color who struggled with racism and segregation every day, whether it was illegal or not? Can you imagine it as a light-skinned or white person walking hand in hand with your brothers and sisters for their freedom? Can you imagine the fear of the marchers? I mean, they were beaten, yelled at, spat upon, treated as less than in every conceivable way. But they didn't let any of that turn them around. They had the strength in themselves, the strength in their leaders, and they knew that justice was on their side. So they didn't stop. They marched across the state of Alabama, all the way to the steps of the Capitol building. On the other side, could you try to imagine at that time the fear of the racist, the Klansman? We don't easily relate to those so different from ourselves, so trying to imagine a thing really takes some effort. But if you could just try for a minute to put aside the judgment, all that righteous anger over the harm that they caused, and imagine what it may have felt like to them. Surely the racists knew by then that their world was about to be turned upside down and that things would never be the same. They must have known that their hatred would not be enough to hold in place an unjust system of inequality. Their fear must have been so palpable once the tides began to turn towards tolerance, towards the direction of equal opportunity for all. This is why they smeared Martin Luther King as a communist. This is why their call to arms was lobbying business owners to lay off people of color. This is why we have federal agents enforcing desegregation laws in states like Alabama. And this is why the issue of desegregation became an issue of life and death. Their only hope for keeping this racism alive was for their world to become so distinctly cleaved into that everyone would have to choose which side to stand on. With so much hatred and fear on one side, no one could maintain the luxury of being neutral. I can imagine Alabama Governor George Wallace peering out from behind the blinds of the Alabama Capitol building at a sea of marchers. In a fight for segregation, his name became well known. He gave the orders to unleash the dogs, to pull out the batons, then to turn on the fire hoses. He escalated the violence of police brutality and empowered Klansmen and racists to hate with impunity. George Wallace helped to create an environment in which hatred and racism were acceptable. He's known for his fiery speeches, for which he famously proclaimed segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. So if we expected any group of people to despise a political leader like George Wallace, it would be the African American community. I mean, who could blame black people for hating this man? However, this is not how Martin Luther King responded. I wonder how many closed their ears, how many turned away in disgust when Martin Luther King preached about loving the oppressor. Martin Luther King's words are sometimes hard to hear. He spoke so clearly and eloquently about love and forgiveness. He said, "Another way is open in our quest for freedom. Nonviolent resistance that combines tough-mindedness and tender-heartedness. It avoids the complacency of soft-minded and the violence of the hard-hearted. Through nonviolent resistance, we should be able to oppose an unjust system and at the same time love the perpetrators of the system." Last week, Rachel spoke about love as a redeeming power that we need in a world that is slow to forgive. We need to love our enemies because when we deny them the transformative power of love, we deny them redemption. How can one be redeemed without love? How can one begin again on a different path if we deny them the possibility of reconciliation? George Wallace was known for his racism, but I also want to remember him as a man who sought redemption. What most people don't know about Wallace was that he asked for forgiveness from the black community. As a Christian, he did a lot of soul searching as to the meaning of his faith. He contacted many civil rights leaders and apologized. Most of them heard the words of a transformed man. In 1982, Wallace ran for governor again. And this time, he won 90% of the black vote. His final term as governor, he saw a record number of black appointments to government offices, and some of these records still stand to this day. This is the same man. This is the same man that said segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Same man. If leaders like Martin Luther King did not extend love to Wallace and challenge all who would listen to do the same, would he have been transformed? What is our message to the world when we deny the transformative power of love to our enemies? What do we deny to our world? Our strategy would have to be just to wait for all of our enemies to die and hope that the hatred dies with it. Just hope and pray that someday they'll see the light. Where would we be today if Martin Luther King preached this message? Everyone with racist thoughts may still be filled with the same hate. And we would have denied transformation to our communities and our nation. This is a lesson for me, that everyone is redeemable through the transforming power of love. If Wallace can change, the segregation forever guy, then so can Fred Phelps, the God hates fags guy. What waves would sweep across this nation in a Fred Phelps apology? Think it's not possible? Go back 50 years and ask the same question of Wallace. What do we deny our world when we deny it this transformation? When we deny our enemies our love, and forgiveness, we deny them redemption. How can we heal a broken world without redemption, without forgiveness? This doesn't mean that ill deeds go unpunished or that justice has to take a back seat. It is in the Islamic text, Hadith of Bukhari. According to Anas, after the messenger of God said, "Help your brother whether he is oppressor or oppressed," Anas replied to him, "O messenger of God, a man who is oppressed, I'm ready to help, but how does one help an oppressor?" By hindering him from doing wrong, he said. It is here that we can see that love can exist in the presence of justice. One can be loved and still sit in a jail cell, or on the other side of a restraining order. Love requires us to act. It sometimes calls on ourselves to put ourselves in harm's way. But love also sometimes calls for separation. Sometimes we have to separate just so that we can fulfill our potential, or just so that we can keep our families and children safe. We may find a way to give Fred Phelps universal love, but that does not mean that we sit by as he spews hatred, claiming the authority of God. So what could love look like in our actions towards the hateful? How do we love and transform the oppressors while protecting and holding up the oppressed? At the times when it is hardest to love, those are the times that love is most needed. As a nonviolence trainer, I helped people to remember to be mindful in tense situations. I was good at this as a protester, not so much in life. Once a woman linked in arms with me was beaten by an officer with a baton. Though I was afraid, I was strong and I remained mindful and nonviolent. Another time in Dallas, a counter-demonstrator was pushing me and just trying to start a fight. I calmly voiced what he was doing and asked him to stop, making it clear that I was standing my ground. He actually apologized. So why do I find it so hard to bring this mindfulness into my thoughts and actions and every day to my enemies? I should love Fred Phelps and others like him, but it is difficult. What's the alternative? What's the alternative? Wallace came out to a local Martin Luther King Day parade towards the end of his life. He sat under a tree in his wheelchair and spoke with everyone who would come and talk with him. Some of the people looked away in disgust, but there were others that went and listened to him. Wallace told them that he'd been wrong. He asked them for forgiveness. Many people granted him that forgiveness, and he moved out of the category of being only a racist to being a man that had done wrong, was loved anyway, and became redeemed. As we struggle to stand on the side of love, may we have the integrity to speak the truth, to lift up the oppressed, to listen deeply, and to love boldly.